Are your photos too bright or too dark? Maybe you don't always know where your subject sits compared to the mid-gray. You don't need a fancy camera. You don't need technical skills either. Just a simple way to see light differently. After this video, that will click and you will finally master exposure for good. Alright guys, the reason why I say that all you have to do is look at light differently in order to get the perfect exposure is because once you determine what the gray is for your camera, after that you won't have to get bogged down with all this technical stuff that the camera companies and the cameras throw at us. You really don't. So why don't we go out and figure out what the camera thinks is mid-gray, and after that I'm going to explain to you how you can place that on a grayscale chart, memorize it, think about it, and you don't have to worry ever again about exposure. I promise you. Alright guys, part 1. What is mid-gray for your camera? In order for you to determine what your camera thinks is mid-gray, you will have to take your camera, figure out what ISO you want. If you want it to be ISO 100, you want it to be ISO 400, ISO 640, whatever you want as an artist, determine whatever aperture you want to shoot your subject at. As an artist, I choose to do f4 or I choose to do 2.8. Then you take those numbers, dial it into your camera for your ISO and for your aperture. Then you go outside on a bright sunny day, sun in the back of you, point your camera to the sky, make sure that you don't have any clouds in there. We don't want any white, we only want the blue. Frame it, and now with your shutter speed, keep dialing it until you hit 0. So now that is exactly what your camera thinks is mid-gray. Take those numbers, memorize them, put them over here, and that is your baseline. That is what is mid-gray for your camera. There's one point that I want to bring up over here. Every camera has a way to adjust exposure. So my camera, I have set it to adjusting exposure with 1/3 increments, 1/3 up, 1/3 down. For me to go from mid-gray to white, which is about 2.5 stops, with pure white, no details, it's about 2.5 stops. And if I have to go from mid-gray to black, it's also 2.5 stops. So in order for me to do that, I have to click each stop 3 times, meaning dial 1 time, dial 2 times, dial 3 times, because I have done my increments in my camera at 1/3 of a stop. Sometimes people like just one shot, sometimes they like half a stop, but now you know what your mid-gray is and you know how to reach pure white and you know how to reach pure black by increasing or decreasing your exposure. Now you can increase or decrease your exposure by f-stop or by shutter speed. I personally don't do it with ISO, so I won't even speak about that, okay? So basically, your f-stop is dialed in and your ISO is dialed in. And now, in order for you to get the right exposure, you are going to dial 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, or at least I will dial 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. That gives me 1 stop. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, that gives me another stop, and then 1/3 takes me to the 2.5 stops. I know mentally in my brain that if I want to go from mid-gray to white, I have to dial my dial 2.5 stops to white, 2.5 stops to black. Now you have the keys to go in and open the door of exposure and do exactly what you want to do to make the exposure exactly how you want it to come out. Alright, so now you guys are going to say to me, hey Ejaz, you made us get our mid-gray of the camera in bright sunny light with the sun on the back and blue skies. That's great, but what happens when we get on location and the light is different? So my answer to that for you guys is going to be, of course it's going to be different, but it's Mother Nature. It has to be different. You're not taking photographs of subjects inside a studio with controlled lights. Of course you have to adjust. First, you'll adjust based on the grayscale for your subject. Then you will have to go and adjust on location for the light that's coming in, meaning the environment, the darkness and the lightness. But that is exactly what you need to do. You need to open up if it's dark, and you need to drop down if it is bright. But that is something cannot be given to anybody as a cookie cutter. But we can come very, very close to our exposure by following this mid-gray. All right, guys, point number 2, how to use it. Now you're going to turn down, you're going to say to me, what is the big deal? You figured out what mid-gray is. Now what you can do is you don't have to worry about any kind of technical mumbo jumbo at all. It's very, very simple. From this point on, it's not difficult. Why? Because you know what your camera thinks is mid-gray. If you're shooting a white subject, all you have to do is point your camera to the white subject, open up by 1.5 to 2 stops to compensate for the grayscale, and then compensate again for the light that's coming in due to the environment. Or if your subject sits in black or 1 stop above black, then you have to do 1.5 stops down. The easiest way for you to practice what is mid-gray is to go out in the real world with or without a camera and look and say, this is mid-gray, this is light gray, this is lighter gray, and this is white. Or this is mid-gray, and this is dark gray, and this is darker gray, and this is black. That's all you need to do. So pick up an apple. Oh, you know what? Better yet, look at your loved one and ask yourself, where does he or she sit on the grayscale? I will look at my boys and I will say, okay, one of my boy sits in mid-gray and the other boy sits in lighter mid-gray. Then I want you to pick up an apple and say, where does this sit in the mid-gray? It's not exactly mid-gray, it's a little bit darker than the mid-gray. Now, if I'm photographing an apple, I am going to move my dial down so it brings in less light, because the camera is going to make it mid-gray, right? You can practice this even at home. You will look at your loved one and you're going to turn down and you're going to say, this is mid-gray. If the skin is mid-gray, then you don't have to do anything to the exposure. If the skin is darker, you move it down. If the skin is lighter, then you move it up. That is how you are going to practice. Then you're going to say, I'm going to Camargue to go photograph white horses. I want you to utilize the mid-gray so you don't have to worry about technicalities. Of course, it's not pure white, which means from your mid-gray point, it's not going to be 2.5 stops. But it's white, right? Is it 1 stop more, or is it 2 stops more, or is it 2.5 stops more? It's not 2.5 stops more because you're going to blow out the whites. So maybe it's 1.5 stop more. There you go. What you are going to do before you get to set, you are just going to dial your camera 1.5 stop higher than what your camera thinks is mid-gray. The reason why you don't have to do any metering for your subject is because you're following the grayscale. Yes, you do have to tweak it on set based on the environment and the light coming in. But I'm just saying, bring your camera before you get on set to a position where you're just shuffling with 1/3 up and down and you'll get perfect exposure. So before getting on set, you've chosen the ISO, you've chosen the aperture. Now your subject is not mid-gray, so your subject for the white horses is 1.5 stop higher. So whatever your mid-gray is, increase the exposure by 1.5 stop. I personally don't do anything to my aperture and don't do anything to my ISO. So the only thing I do is I take my shutter speed up and I take my shutter speed down. I get my thing. So if I'm shooting a Camargue horse from my mid-gray, I'm going to increase it by 1.5 stop. And what is 1.5 stop for me? It's 5 clicks. 1 click, 2 click, 3 clicks, that's 1 stop. 1 click, 2 click, that's 2/3 of a stop, and I'm there. Even before you get on location, you have your measurements dialed in, or at least I should say, I have my measurements dialed in to a place where all I have to do is point it to the horse and adjust it for the environment. So what if I was going to go shoot a bear? It's brown. It's dark. How can I figure out what and where it sits on the mid-gray chart? One way is memory, because I've practiced so much, I know where it sits. For me, a grizzly bear is about a stop and a half dark than my mid-gray. Mind you, I'm sitting in New York, grizzly is in Alaska, but I know that my grizzly bear is going to be a 1.5 stop dark. Great. So before getting to the grizzly bear, I am going to dial down my shutter speed so I can get to the right exposure even before I've got there. And if it is too low, now I can say to myself, hey, you know what? This is too low. So now that is an advantage of following the grayscale chart. You can determine before you get there. Oh my God, my shutter speed is too low. You know what? No, I need more shutter speed. Okay, so I'm going to add more shutter speed. I'm going to drop down on my aperture. Either or. And I keep saying this again and again. I don't. I walk away. But you can do that. You can determine your exposure before you get on location, and you are going to be so close to nailing your exposure, 100% guarantee you. This is a grayscale chart. We have the horse, we have the bear. Now let's go get something that is mid-gray. Look at this bird. It is landing exactly on mid-gray. Tell me what I'm going to do. Nothing. I'm going to listen to what the camera says. Actually, I'm going to listen to what my mind says, but I'm going to let the camera just verify that for me. Before leaving New York, getting on set there, I have already dialed in my exposure, and my exposure is going to be 640. I'm going to shoot it with a long lens, so it's going to be f4, and then my shutter speed is going to be based on what the grayscale is telling me. Right now it's telling me don't do anything because the subject is mid-gray. I don't need to do anything. Done, finished. So let's do another example. Arctic wolf. It falls in white. In my opinion, it falls in 1 stop to 1.5 stop, just like the Kamarang horse falls in that zone. So I'm going to take my ISO, I'm going to take my f-stop, and I'm going to increase my exposure by 1.5 stop. 5 clicks later, my exposure is dialed in New York before getting to the North Pole. I'm going to give you guys one last example. These black horses, where do they sit on the grayscale? They sit at 2 stops dark, not 2.5, because if I go 2.5, I'm going to lose the detail. So I'm only going to go 2 stops. What do? Drop down my shutter speed, determine whether the shutter speed is good enough for the action, and then based on that, adjust my aperture or not, or walk away. That's totally your choice. And say, okay, great. My exposure is already dialed in. Now, get there, take off your camera, beautify your environment. Okay, spot meter, great. It's coming in exactly how I want it. Increase it, decrease it. You are home. Do you really need a fancy camera for this? Do you need any technical skills for this? I don't think so. You're there. It is so easy and it is so fast, and it does not require any technical skills whatsoever. Everybody and anybody can nail this. And I'm not oversimplifying this, but the honest truth about this is, yeah, that's all you need. You don't need to worry about aperture priority and shutter priority. This is so simple. It works. I have worked it from 2012. I started doing wildlife full time. Of course, I was doing fashion before, but I've worked it and worked it and worked it. Every single time my exposure is within 1/8 of the measurement. So basically putting your subject on a mid-gray chart, figuring out exactly where it sits makes a world of a difference. It's not until October that I go, but I'm so excited about this trip. I am going to the Sahara Desert to photograph the Fennec fox. I've done the North Pole a few times. I'm good with the cold weather, but as far as the Sahara Desert, the heat, they say that the temperatures are going to go from maybe 35 degrees all the way up to 110 or 150 at times. Now, the Fennec Fox sits on the grayscale just about half a stop towards the brighter side. But here's the problem. The problem is that the sand sits exactly where the Fennec Fox is going to sit. So how do I expose with separating the subject and the background? So that's a challenge that I'm facing. But in order for my mind to be clear and think about composition and how to get the best photograph of this beautiful animal, of course, I'm going to dial in my exposure before I even leave New York. My brain should work there. My brain should work in terms of composition. My brain should work in terms of how can I bring back images that have never been seen before. Bottom line, what I'm trying to say to you is this mid-gray chart helps. No technical requirements, no fancy cameras. It's all there. You can dial in your exposure even without holding a camera. All right, guys, speak to you soon. Thanks.